Welcome to Season 9 of Purposeful Empathy, a show dedicated to amplifying the voices of people from across the globe who believe the world needs more empathy and are doing something about it. Today's episode is brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Thanks for watching. Enjoy the show. Welcome to a new episode of Purposeful Empathy. Today I'm joined by Simon Shedletzky, who helps leaders listen to and nurture the voice of others. He supports humble leaders, those who know they are both part of the problems they experience and the solutions they can create, as they put their people and purpose first. He is the author of the forthcoming book, Speak Up Culture. When leaders truly listen, people step up. Congratulations. I know what that's like. So congrats, Shed.
Thank you.
After years on the corporate track, Shed was introduced to and inspired by the work of Simon Sinek, who isn't, and soon after meeting him became the fourth person to join his team. For more than a decade, Shed has contributed to Simon Sinek Inc., where he was chief of staff and head of brand experience training and development, where he headed a global team of speakers and facilitators. Shed continues to do the work of Simon Sinek, helping to create a more, and I love this, inspired, safe, and fulfilled world. So welcome to the show, Shed.
Thank you so much. So glad to be here with you and have this conversation with you, Anita.
Beautiful. I love talking to fellow Canucks as well. I know you're in Toronto. I'm going to ask about Speak Up Culture in a second, so we'll have a lot of time to unpack that. But first, why don't we start 64,000 feet up?
That high? That's
high.
even uncomfortable for me. Yeah, carry on.
Let's talk I talk about an empathy deficit in our world, a massive empathy deficit. I would like to know your thoughts on why we aren't more empathic as a society.
We are living outside of our natural habitat. Hard stop. So if you look at where we came from as an origin in our species, I know that the word tribal is charged, but we were a tribal species, a community-based species. It is documented and known that we lived in communities of 100 to 150 people. This has been backed by research by Robin Dunbar's number, that we can maintain on average 150 stable social relationships. So, for example, we've just met, but if later this afternoon, we both happen to be in the same coffee shop, or this weekend, let's say I'm coming to Montreal for a weekend trip, and I'm like, Anita, right? That's a stable social relationship. Even more so, I'd say, have a coffee, let's chat. Now, if we don't speak again for 5 years and we happen to be in the same coffee shop, we might be like, I think I might, whatever, right? Maybe we'll say, do we know each other? And we make a connection, but we might not sit down and have a coffee together, right? So sitting down, having a coffee with someone, knowing how you're connected, why you know each other, is what Robin Dunbar calls a stable social relationship. Some of us can maintain up to 250. Some of us are 100. The average is 150. And so there's a hilarious meme, which is, I want to pull it up because it's so good. Am I allowed to swear on
Yes.
Purposeful Empathy? Okay, good. That allows me to be more empathetic, is using profanity. I sent it to my friend Dave. Here it is.
Okay, yeah.
Well, I'll just do it quickly. So be kind. You never know what someone is going through. Love it. Also me, nice turn signal, fuckface. So we live this dichotomy. And especially when someone's in a vehicle, it's harder to see their humanity. And so we're living outside of our designed habitat. And if you go back to the origins of our species, if we saw another from a different tribe or community, all of a sudden, cortisol, watch out, they may be a threat. They may be after us. They may be after our resources. And so we have to do the work of connection and empathy, because it is work. It's outside, I think, of our natural wiring. It's worthwhile, and we need to make progress with it. But that's my view. I'm curious how that resonates with your view.
Well, 100%, because what you're basically putting an emphasis on is to have empathy on purpose, because industrialization and modernity has made it so that we're kind of all living, in alone spaces, when we're actually really meant to be, like you said, in this comfort zone of 150 or so people. That's a great way to look at it. And so our society's been set up for us not to, forge as strong relationships as we have done in the past, and that's a big problem. That's what I'm getting.
Yes, yeah, and and yet I'm still a believer of the power of transforming someone's day by walking into an elevator, mask on or off, and saying, "Hi, how are you? Hope you're having a good day," and just being genuine. And I'm like, "Oh, that was nice," and that little shot of oxytocin gives me more courage to extend that care, empathy, purposefully to another, whether they're a stranger or my kid. And the great irony of this stuff as well is you and I just met and we're biologically wired like be nice, be sociable, treat each other well, make a friend. It's a lot easier for me to treat you nicely than it is for me to treat my wife or my children nicely consistently because I'm always with them, It's so interesting of like a lot of our teachings, it's very easy to do with people that we might never ever interact with ever again, and really hard to do with the people who we see every single day. It's just one of the many dichotomies and weirdness and the grayness of being a human being.
But ain't that the truth? I totally know what you're talking about. Okay, so to shift gears a little here,
Yeah,
what
nice start.
role?
Nice start.
No. This is like,
I like it.
okay.
Yes. What role?
What role can leaders play to help create a more empathic world, given everything that you just talked about?
Lead by example. Lead by example. I mean, the number of leaders who say one thing publicly, whether they said it or wrote it themselves, or someone on their comms or PR team did, and then behave the exact opposite to it. And then we wonder why there's a trust deficit with those who have positions of power in this world. Like I'm fine. Have a communications, have a PR team, but like live the message you espouse and surround yourself with people who hold you to that level of account as well. And so leaders play a huge role because we follow their lead. I've devised a little equation for culture that I'm writing about and the role that leaders play in that. So the equation is culture equals in brackets values multiplied by behavior to the power of influence. So we ought to have values or whatever you want to call them, guiding principles, like written down things of like, this is what it means to behave in a way that is in accordance with this family or organization or society, right? I believe in making it tangible. I even believe in making it action oriented. Like I could say, Anita, more excellence this afternoon, please. And you're like, okay. Like excellence is probably the most meaningless value ever. Like it means nothing. Or we could say, do more of your great work. Okay, that's something, right? So now we hang up from this recording. You're like, what should I do next? I could do this. We're like, or I could spend my time on this, which is my great work, and find ways to still delegate or do my other work that isn't great, but not prioritize it, as an example, right? That's more action oriented. Now we can write down our values. Heck, we can even put them in stone, but if we don't live them, they're meaningless. Anything multiplied by 0 is 0. Anything multiplied by a negative is a negative. You can say it, behave the opposite. You now have a toxic, deleterious culture, and it's raised to the power of influence. Influence meaning how much influence you have in a particular population, which often could be title or authority. But I've also been, as I mentioned to you, in middle management roles where I have no authority, but I have a lot of influence because I influence the people who do have authority. Ergo, my behavior matters more and my values matter more than someone who has less influence and who might be more junior or whatever it might be. And so that's how I think about culture, and that we follow the lead of our leaders. Yeah. And if you don't do it,
don't do it, everything falls apart.
Meaningless. Yeah.
It's meaningless. I love that equation.
It's even worse than meaningless. It's hypocritical.
Yeah, and I think there's you put a word out there that I think I want to circle back to on trust, which is I think an important value to espouse and to engender in workplaces. But let me just ask a couple
Hmm.
of follow-up questions based on what you shared. Right?
Yes.
Your first sentence out of the gates when I asked that question was lead by example. So two follow-up questions are um, are are leaders born or do they become leaders?
Yeah.
To be able to lead by example. So I just want to ask about that. And then the second question I want to ask is, one in your equation is this word values. And
Yes.
so I'm coming into this conversation thinking a value that's worth having as a leader is empathy.
Hmm.
Do you share that? And yeah, should leadership have empathy embedded in its kind of system?
Yes. Cool. Great. So one, I want to circle back to because you said trust as a value. I actually don't think trust is a value. Trust, and I think you would agree. I think trust is an output. Like trust is a belief. Trust and a belief is a feeling justified from experience.
Mm.
So I can't tell you to trust me. You might, this is the first time that we're meeting. We have mutual connections on LinkedIn. You could see who our mutual connections are. You're like, I love all these people. I'm likely to trust him by virtue of reputation,
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, trust. We cannot make someone trust us. We can only behave in a way that earns that trust repeatedly. And trust can be built. Trust ought to be maintained, and trust can even be repaired if broken.
Mm.
And you may never be able to get it to the levels it once was, because I've also heard trust comprised of 4 C's. I love this. And then we'll answer your questions. So the 4 C's are competency, consistency, character, and compassion.
Mm.
I've worked on this with my friend Rich Davini, who I'll also lean into on your question about our leaders born. So Rich has written a book called The Attributes. He's a retired U.S. Navy SEAL, brilliant guy. The 4 C's. So consistency. I believe that you can do what you say you will do. Consistency is you actually do it when you consistently do it. So you could say, I can get you that report by Tuesday. And I'm like, I have every belief you can get me that report. There's no way you're getting it to me by Tuesday. That could be trust on competence, but not trust on consistency. Then there's character. I trust you to do the right thing. And compassion. I trust you to do the right thing by me, which I
Mm.
think is where empathy comes in as well, front and
Mm.
center.
Mm.
Um, while some of us are born with some of the innate attributes to become better leaders and the ability to develop skills that also couple well with leadership, like listening, as an example. Leaders, so this is a direct quote from Rich Davini, who's a retired SEAL. Leaders aren't born, leaders aren't even made. Leaders are chosen based upon the way that they behave.
Mm.
None of us can call ourselves a leader. That's like calling myself funny or good
An
looking.
ally. Yeah.
Or calling ourselves an ally, right?
Mm.
We don't get to decide. Others do. I can't say I'm a good listener. I can't even say I'm really empathetic or I'm really present, right? All of those are earned based upon our behavior. And it's consistent. Like we don't get crowned leader and then the work is done, right? You earn the title and you earn people calling you that over and over and over based on your consistent behavior. So leaders aren't born. Some of us are born with some of the skills that go well and some of the innate attributes that go well with leadership. But leaders aren't born, leaders aren't made, leaders are chosen based upon the way they behave.
Mm.
I'll pause there and then we can
Wonderful.
talk about empathy.
Yeah, no, love that. So please do.
So I think it depends. So in the way that I believe leadership should be practiced, yes. I'm writing 3 chapters in the book right now. In my books, Speak Up Culture, Leadership Defined, Select Better Leaders, and Support Leaders Better.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of the reasons we have issues with leadership today is we don't understand what the responsibility of the role is.
Mm.
Leadership is not about being in charge. It's about taking care of those in your span of care. I've learned this from Simon Sinek's work with Leaders Eat Last. I think the direct quote from Simon is leaders aren't in charge, they're responsible for those in their charge, which I agree with. I believe we ought to have more of a standard definition of leadership that is more akin to servant leadership. I think leadership and servant leadership are the same thing. Leadership is not a title, it's a set of behaviors. And I think there's room and nuance for this is what our brand of leadership looks like at this company. I don't or organization. I don't think the goal should be uniformity of leadership because like we laud Steve Jobs as a great leader. Visionary, he had vision, but you know, people went on a roller coaster wild ride and had great experiences with him. But I've also heard that, he chewed off people's heads, yelled at them, didn't make them feel so good, made them feel pretty insecure. I would imagine Elon Musk is kind of probably similar. There's sort of an archetype of the typical sort of visionary leader who can also not be the most empathetic. Sometimes, like for example, empathy can get in the way of your job. Too much empathy can make it hard to be a caregiver. Too much empathy would make a lousy stand-up comedian. When it comes to leadership, I do think empathy and compassion are very important. In the brand of leadership that I believe in and wish to cultivate, I do believe it's important. And in some organizations and contexts and for some leaders, it's less important. But I believe there should be some empathy if you do view that you wish to have your people feel safe, feel fulfilled, and want to be contributing with you for the long run.
Love it. Love it. So glad. These were digression questions, like as follow-ups, but I'm so glad I asked them. So today's episode was brought to you by Grand Huron International, an on-demand coaching provider for individuals and companies. Let's talk a little bit now about speak up culture. Okay. I'm curious to unpack what you mean by that. And you believe that speak up culture can actually create greater empathy in our organizations and in society. So what is it and how can that happen?
Absolutely. So speak up culture very much builds upon already established work with psychological safety. So Amy Edmondson, who is lovely, and I call her the founding mother of psychological safety. I think psychological safety exists before her, but she really put it on the map, had some great research done. She sort of stumbled across it in a hospital setting with emergency room settings and the difference in health outcomes based upon if you have practitioners who have psychological safety and practitioners who don't. I call it a speak up culture because I think psychological safety is the input to get us a speak up culture as an output. I describe a speak up culture as an environment in which people feel safe to share ideas, even if they're half baked, share concerns, even if they're unpopular, share disagreements, even with senior leaders, and admit mistakes, knowing that on the other side of that is improvement as opposed to punishment. And when we have speak up cultures, we are more trusting, we are more innovative. There's more diversity in what we can speak about and what is included and allowed to be addressed in our organizations, rather than we don't talk about politics or we don't talk about Bruno, which is a Encanto joke for anyone who has young kids. But I've been parts of teams and have been in relationships where there is a healthy speak up culture, and it's marvelous. Like the lengths and the depths of what you can talk about and it be okay and healthy, wonderful. Both about work and just about life. I've also been parts of teams and organizations where there is not a speak up culture. And in organizations and in teams in which we repeatedly punish or ignore people for speaking up, we suddenly get a culture of silence. And that culture of silence is not consensus or agreement. It is actually quite blinding and dangerous.
And I think speak up culture is actually really important to democracy, to be honest. Like, I feel like it's almost, this is not the context, I don't think, in which you're actually like really, firmly anchoring your work. But how does speak up culture compare and differ from call out culture or cancel culture, right?
Yes. So there's lots there, and I won't pretend to be an expert on this, but there are experts. Megan Wrights out of the UK is doing good work on the relationship between speak up culture and employee activism. So both call outs, cancel culture, politics as well. I mean, democracy works because we elect officials or are appointed in some instances who we expect to represent the best interests of society. Now, if those who are selected do not represent what society at large wants, you now have a conversation of is democracy working?
Mm-hmm.
And we look at some countries, ours included, other countries to the south, north, east, and west of ours, where democracy is kind of faltering. I think it's because we elect these people expecting them to listen to us, to hear our concerns, and act in kind with the popular view of society. Like that's how it works at its best. Um, Cancel culture and call out and whistleblowing, these things are important. I mean, whistleblowing, it happens when you attempt to speak up, no one listens, and finally you speak out. This is what happened at Boeing, where there was a senior manager, Ed Pearson, who knew that the writing was on the wall. These are not safe planes with the Boeing 737 MAX 8. He spoke up, he spoke up, he was punished. He kept trying, he was punished. He was afraid he was going to get fired. He finally retired. Another plane went down and he finally, or I think it was the second plane went down and he finally spoke out and whistle blew. Cancel culture and call out culture, we have to be careful. I think we need to take these concerns seriously. And, I think sometimes if we behave in a way that is guilty until proven otherwise, can be dangerous and destructive. So I think we need to listen. I think we need to acknowledge. And I think we need to say, let's do an investigation and find out. Because it can be dangerous and it can be damaging, and we can do more damage than good potentially. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to borrow. I'm going to not appropriate for myself, but I'm going to use the term and give you the credit for the term in my classroom, because I've noticed over the last year of teaching that the cancel culture
Mm.
kind of ethos among younger Gen Zs, for example, is creating some dynamics in the classroom that I don't think are healthy for intellectual debate and sort of like seeing different perspectives, right? There's this assumption that if you've said something and it triggers a belief about like an ecosystem of thoughts, that you just cancel the person automatically and kind of judge them. That's not healthy
No.
for like social fabric. And so I know your work is really talking about, how it can be useful for innovation and to avoid sort of groupthink and things like that. But I actually think it's very important for society writ large.
I completely agree. And I think we need to, the vast majority of people, I think, have positive intent. There's a difference between intent and impact. There are some people in our world who I think do indeed, while they have their own agenda that they might believe is positive, it is divisive in nature.
Mm,
Um, I think some of the things that's happening in the Supreme Court in the United States of America, divisive.
hmm
It might represent some, it doesn't represent all. That's
hmm
different. But I think the vast majority, I mean, I myself have been in situations where I'm thinking of one situation in particular where I said something that landed for certain people in a way that wasn't well received. And I got curious about it and I owned it. It wasn't my intention, but it was still
mm
my impact.
mm
And it was a learning experience. And so, but I agree, we're not making progress if you're like, you said a wrong thing, ergo, you have no standing in society. Now,
mm
if someone repeatedly makes offenses and they prove to be racist or discriminatory or, biased to the place that it is oppressing people, not cool,
Yeah.
But if someone makes one comment unbeknownst to them, that is a moment to, instead of call out, call in. And there's a
hmm
brilliant TED talk on calling in and calling up, like I expect more of you. But yes, I think leaders own their impact, whether it's intended or not. And if it's like one strike and you're out, like, how about let's learn, let's improve, give each other chances, and have some empathy to realize that just because someone may have said or done one thing doesn't mean that they are labeled as deserving to be extricated from society.
100%. So I'm going to have some information about how to order your book or pre-order your book in the description below. I have a penultimate question before we conclude our conversation. And thank you so much for making the time, Shed. This is so much fun.
Cool.
I would be remiss, given that you worked with Simon Sinek, and I'm a fan of his work and sort of the whole idea of find your why.
Mm-hmm.
I'm curious to know what you personally learned within the organization and how that helped you personally, professionally develop your own sense of purpose, how working in that ecosystem changed your behaviors as a leader.
Yeah.
Yeah, just your own personal growth given that unique experience.
Yeah, thank you. And still working with Simon and still in relationship with them. So still learning. So I recently had a chance to meet with Amy Edmondson, and a comment she made I think really dovetails nicely with a piece of my experience. I asked Amy, who's a prolific Harvard professor, you know, look at any thinker, management, whatever, she's up there. And I asked her when she was junior in her career, did she know, where she wanted to go and her vision for her career? And she's like, no, I just wanted to be useful. And I love that. And so one of the things I learned on Team Simon is when I first joined, I wasn't doing the thing that I ultimately wanted to do. I wanted to do speaking and facilitating and coaching because I love it and I'm extroverted and it aligns with my strengths. But they needed to know that I was doing it for the right reasons. They needed to trust me. And I struggled in the first couple of years in the organization because I felt unfulfilled in the fulfillment company. Like I wasn't doing the things I wanted to do. But they're like, well, prove to us that you can do the thing we need you to do before we give you a chance to do the thing you want to do. And it was
Mm-hmm.
kind of like a Karate Kid painting the fence moment of when I finally like came to the realization that instead of focusing on what I'm not doing and want to do, just rock the thing that's on my plate, even if it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
And when I finally did that, trust built, and like the world was my oyster with them. And I've gone on to I've been with them for almost 11 years now, and it's been amazing. Simon himself has taught me that something that a mentor of his taught him, which is 2/3 of an answer is better than an answer and a half. And it's still something that I do to this day. It's good old George Costanza, leave them wanting more.
Oh man.
And I'm not good at it. It's not a strength for me. But if you ask me a question and I give you an answer and a half, wouldn't it be better to give you 2/3 of an answer and you want to know more?
Yeah, that is good one. Oh,
And
that
so
really
it's
resonates for me.
just to talk less, say more. And the best time for your opinion to be heard is when it's asked for. So instead of sharing everything, share enough, maybe even share less than enough to get dialogue, as opposed to oversharing. And the last thing is, Simon is prolific, Simon is wonderful, and no leader and no organization is perfect. The same problems that any organization has, Simon's organization is not immune to. Same things. And so we have to work just as hard, if not harder, to bring the message to life from the inside out because A, it's the expectation, and B, we're not immune. And so I've learned about the importance of practicing what you preach from the inside out. And if you don't, you might as well just stop because it's insincere.
Okay, so I'm gonna like sneak in another question on behalf of the students that I'm gonna have this fall at McGill in my leadership class.
Mm-hmm.
What advice would you give to young 20 somethings that are starting their career,
Yeah.
want to work in business, want to be leaders that you haven't already mentioned, like
Yeah,
another
yeah, yeah.
nugget?
So one is, why do you want to be a leader? And if it's for status and recognition and pay and title, do us a favor and don't, because those make toxic leaders. You're allowed to want to do well. You're allowed to want to perform, but know that the responsibility of leaders are to take care of people. And if you aren't interested in that, don't do it, because you will make a bad leader. If you want to do that, we still expect you to perform, but when you become a leader, you're no longer responsible for catching all the fish. You're responsible for teaching people how to catch fish in their own right, which will be different than how you do it. And it's hard, but it's wonderful. And the other thing I'll just share is there's nothing like on the job training. You can spend all the time you want preparing to be a parent. You have no idea what it's like until you're a parent. You can babysit, right? But until you either adopt or have one. And so the wonderful thing about university and college, though, is, no offense to you, Anita, but some of the greatest places where you'll grow is outside of the classroom. It's the relationships you have. It's the volunteer work that you do. And so get as much experience leading, not just being in charge of being the boss, but leading and supporting the development and growth of others, such that by the time you do become a parent or a leader, which are kind of interchangeable, you've got some reps.
Okay, so kill me, but I'm going to ask another question just because it
I'm
actually, you're good.
I got time.
It's about your book. It's about your book. It's about
Okay,
your
cool.
book.
Cool,
It's
cool,
just
cool.
because you've done the 2/3. You've done the 2/3. And now it's going to come back, right? Yeah, you're deploying that.
I'm trying.
That trick. You mentioned earlier that your book is in 3 parts, and what I'm picking up as a follow-up question here is that do you think that society and organizations have caught up to the moment where that kind of leadership, what you're saying, servant leadership is actually a leadership where it's not about the role and
Mm-hmm.
do you think we're in a moment where people are choosing leaders, like they're promoting people, they're choosing their talent based on potential with all the right factors in mind?
No. I wouldn't be writing and doing this work if we were there. I think we have a huge gap. Um, I think we're making progress, but um, the book isn't divided into 3 parts, but there's sort of 3 chapters in the middle where
Okay.
it's define leadership. We ought to define it. Then we should select leaders against that definition. I think too often we're still selecting leaders for wrong reasons: performance, nepotism, not trust, not service. I think we need to select against the definition. And then we need to support leaders who are in role. HBR did a study that the gap between when leaders are put in place, so first management role, usually at the age of 29, first formal management training, age 41. There's a 12-year gap on average between when someone gets their first management job and when they're given formal training. That's a problem. We go to school to get all these crazy degrees to become, highly qualified technicians or whatever it might be, but we don't give people any leadership training. Like, come on. So yeah, I think there's a huge gap, and I think we are still promoting too much on who's the highest performer, who's the most driven, which isn't a bad thing, who's the most responsible. We give them a promotion saying, great, now you're in charge of all the people who are worse at the job than you were. Go get them. Oh, and by the way, it's a totally different job. And you're going to get frustrated because they're not as good as the job as you were. And they were used to be your peers and friends. Now they're not, by the way. Like, we're not setting people up in positions to succeed when they do step into the roles. Some of the best leaders I know have fully admitted to me, I have no idea how to do my people's jobs, but that's not my job. My job is to ask them how they're doing, what they need, remove the blocks, help them grow.
Yeah.
Some of the best leaders I know have zero qualification to do the job, but they're people leaders.
What an important book that's coming out. All right, can't wait to order my copy. Again, information in the comments below. Last question, we are here. I like to invite my guests to consider a time in their life when they were on the receiving end of empathy and what that meant for them. So the answers are always so different and so delicious. So anything come up for you?
I think of the times, and it's an honor to do it and an honor to receive it, where you're doing something which could be a piece of salad in your teeth, or it could be something you're saying or doing that you are unaware of the negative impact it's having on others, and someone has the risk and takes the risk and courage to say, hey, I want to let you know that there's a piece of salad in your teeth, figuratively or literally. And I can think of an example just this week where my head of operations on my team, Alejandro, did that for me on something that I had no awareness that I was doing. And I was like, thank you. And that was hard because he reports into me. I have more influence. I have more authority in the organization than he does, but he felt it was worth the risk to our relationship, to his job, to his reputation, to say the thing and help me grow.
Well, obviously, that means that speak up culture exists in your organization, right?
We work at it every day. We work at it every day. And sometimes we're better than other days and moments. But yes, it's one of the great joys of having to live what it is that we preach and write about.
On that great note, thank you for your time, Shed. And thank you to everyone who's been listening and watching. We'll see you next week at Purposeful Empathy. What if you had access to your own council of coaches to help you break free of your thinking clutter, make that important decision, and liberate you from whatever is holding you back? At Grand Huron International, you get to choose the coach of your choice anytime from anywhere. Visit grandhuroninternational.ca and harness the power of on-demand coaching today.